It's something that's all over our streets.
Downtown is a smorgasbord of drugs.
And it has a big impact on our housing crisis.
3 weeks ago, I found an 8-ball of meth on the ground.
This week, we're talking about meth and hearing from 3 men on how they escaped the drug.
I was in such a state of paranoia. Yeah, if somebody would have came up there, I would have, I'd have thought they were trying to get me.
And we know this question is starting to sound like a broken record. But why is it taking so long for Portland police to get body cameras? Plus, most kids can now get the COVID vaccine. But how many actually are? The numbers are coming in. Here's the story. A lot on this Monday. It feels like a Monday, doesn't it? It really does. I'm Maggie Vespa. Welcome to The Story. This, if you're not familiar, is the show where we take your feedback and then we turn it into content. You'll see proof of that soon. So sound off, email thestory@kgw.com. Reach out on social media. Use that hashtag, TheStoryKGW. Our team is literally sitting there, staring at their screens, watching for your comments, your questions, everything that you want to see or what you think of what you're seeing tonight. So let us know. Okay, with that note, let's dive into the big story now. You just saw some of it at the top. It comes courtesy of several people, but first and foremost, it comes courtesy of these 3 men, Kenneth, Nick, and Eddie. Our team interviewed them on the streets of Portland, where all 3 used to live, used to sleep, and used to get high. Now, off the bat, we do want to make this very clear tonight that all 3 of these men are housed, they are working, and they are sober. But for years, their main drug of choice was meth. Now, we heard their stories because of viewers like Veronica. She emailed us and said, I've worked in the ER as a mental health therapist for over 15 years, and I have seen the impact that meth has had on causing extreme psychosis, paranoia, and violence. She added it is also a huge reason why we have such visible homelessness, even though everyone wants to keep pushing a housing affordability narrative. Veronica then included a link to this article in The Atlantic about what some are calling the new meth. If you haven't seen this, we think it's worth your time. It explains how there's a new version of the drug made basically from cheaper, more toxic ingredients. It's both easier to get and more lethal. And the article talks about the impact of this new, more intense meth on the streets of several cities, including Portland. Now, regular viewers of this show will know that we've touched on that Atlantic piece already. We talked through, PPB stats and stats from the state. We spoke with experts, but this week we want to dive deeper, and that is where Kenneth, Nick, and Eddie come in. For the next 3 nights, you will hear about their experiences on the streets of Portland, their take on this new meth, and what they, with their lived experience, think the city should do to really make a dent in the housing crisis. So tonight, we're going to start with an introduction.
In my opinion, it's just the norm. It's the normal out here.
We set up these interviews through Kenneth Morgan.
Yes, graffiti, definitely.
He's the boss out here.
I'm a bus mall trainer for 5th and 6th Avenue.
His team cleans the streets of downtown Portland, everything from graffiti to needles to feces. The program operates via the nonprofit Central City Concern and predominantly employs people in recovery. That's the case with Morgan.
My name is Nick Hayner.
And his 2 crew members.
Eddie Breedwell.
All 3 men struggled with homelessness for years, and all 3 want people to know it's possible to make it off of Portland streets, even for those lost in the throes of addiction. Breedwell, Haynard, and Morgan all used meth. Morgan even sent us an old mugshot to show the difference. He talked openly about the day he got sober.
So February 27th at 9:07 a.m., I was shot in the chest and left for dead. And, that's where drugs led me. Yeah, I died and they brought me back to life.
The man who shot him, Morgan says, has been arrested. He only thinks about it to stay clean out here.
3 weeks ago, I found an 8-ball of meth on the ground. 4 or 5 days ago, I found a 20 bag of heroin. I mean, it's here. We walk down the street and people shoot up.
Grab the can.
Morgan tells his guys if they feel tempted, walk away and call someone.
It's very triggering.
Nick Haynard's been sober 6 months and takes that advice seriously.
Unfortunately, I'm getting used to it.
How easy are drugs to get in Portland?
Extremely easy. extremely easy.
Including meth.
Absolutely.
Haynard is from Portland, and like all three men, he started using young, teenage years. Also, like all three, he believes drugs, but more and more, meth, are a huge part of Portland's housing crisis. The city and its police, he says, are not equipped to deal with the depths of this addiction. Stats back that impression up. The Mental Health Addiction Association of Oregon says meth is now the leading cause of drug-related deaths in Portland. And across the state, overdose deaths have increased dramatically over the last 15 years. In 2010, according to the state medical examiner, 43 people died from meth in Oregon. 9 years later, in 2019, that number had jumped to 289.
I was in such a state of paranoia.
Eddie Breedwell overdosed multiple times, but remembers how he felt when using on a sustained basis.
Way out there. I mean, like I said, it had me hearing people talking that wasn't even talking, but I could hear them in my head, and they were all cops. I sat in the park for 3 hours, afraid to move off a park bench, because I thought as soon as I got up and started walking that they were going to get me. When I see somebody that collects cans, I give them to them.
Breedwell says he got sober when he got arrested. He got this job shortly after his release. All three men agreed to talk about this on camera because they know there are so many others like them struggling on the streets now. They want to send the message, help exists, and it's possible to pull yourself out of that cycle.
What I do out here is when I see somebody in distress, somebody that's having a hard time with being, addicted to drugs, being homeless, I tell them my story. I let them know, hey, I was just like you, because this company this is a second chance company. They don't frown upon you being a drug addict or you being an ex-con or whatever. They give everybody a chance to get back into the workforce. That's why I love this company so much. I love my job.
Our thanks again, by the way, to both Central City Concern and to Kenneth, Eddie, and Nick for being so brave and so open. Guys, our hats off to you for working so hard on your recovery, and you were frankly awesome during that shoot. And by the way, Nick in the middle just celebrated 6 months sober, he told us, which is fantastic. We're going to hear more from them again tomorrow, including their take on that new meth. At least one of the men told us, yeah, he has absolutely used the new meth, and yes, that drug has taken a far more frightening and deadly turn. In the meantime, tonight, let's turn to one of our favorite topics, body cameras for Portland police officers. And as we've told you, Portland is the only major city in the entire country where officers do not wear body cameras already. A few weeks ago, it seemed like that was about to change. Mayor Ted Wheeler proposed $2.6 million for the body cameras in the fall budget, which is still being worked out right now. And he also had support from the city council. The police bureau even made a deal with the feds to put cameras on the officers and meet the demands of a 2014 settlement over police reform. So it seemed like everything was a go, everyone was on board, everyone was happy until last week when a judge ordered all parties to go back into mediation because of disagreements over how the body camera program would actually tangibly work in real time. And one of those parties is the Portland Police Union. So I sat down with their new president, Sergeant Aaron Schmautz, to talk about body cameras.
With body cameras, what can you tell us about where that issue stands right now and just your biggest maybe concerns or your goals in establishing that program?
Sure. I mean, the PPA has been a proponent of body cameras for as long as I can remember, back to like 2012. I remember having conversations. I think the thing that's important for people to understand that the body cameras are kind of a multifaceted discussion. They're expensive. Which is fine. I mean, a lot of things are expensive, but the technology to manage the data is expensive. And then there's a lot of privacy issues or other things that come up that I think kind of all sides, discuss. And so for us, it's an important accountability measure, both for our officers and for the public. I think that it helps tell the story about the way that our public interacts with the police and how the police interact with the public. So, listening, is my first time sitting in federal court the other day, listening to the different perspectives. It's obvious that, the different kind of parties there have different perspectives about how that tool should be used.
Now, to that last point, Sheba emailed us asking if the police union negotiates the purchase of cameras, then will they also determine how those cameras are used? And the real sticking point, or a real sticking point in this whole debate, is who can look at the video and when. And that point is made all the stickier given that the city and the union are in contract negotiations as we speak. So I asked Sergeant Schmautz about that as well.
Is it true that a hang-up in this process seems to be that the union wants officers to be able to view the video before writing their statements or giving their reports?
I can't get into the specific details of what those negotiations are because they're in mediation, but I would tell you the thing that's interesting with any kind of video will always be context. And, you know, officers, when they're involved in these rapidly evolving events, I think it's important for people to be able to explain what occurs. And so, again, from a transparency standpoint, you know, the camera points one direction and the officer may or may not be looking in that direction. There's a myriad of reasons why, you know, just making sure that the officer understands what the public is seeing and so they can provide context to that instead of having to do it later.
Now, of course, another debate is not over when officers can view the video, but when the public can view the video. I want to show you this article. Back in May, Willamette Week reported that the police union, at the time, they had a plan. They wanted the police bureau to be the ones who owned the body camera video, not the city, the police bureau. Their proposal at the time said the video would not be released to the public without a court order, but that the union could get the video within 24 hours. Now, again, we should note that was their proposal as of May. We don't know if this has changed because these negotiations are closed to the public. But last week, I did ask Sergeant Schmautz about that report.
I don't know specifically what, I didn't read that Willamette Week article. You know, anything that the police do is public record. It's obviously subject to redaction based on, you know, like as for instance, you might be in a domestic violence situation or other things. Most of the things that are redacted in those cases are actually the public, not necessarily the police. But, you know, we're a proponent of transparency. We're a proponent of getting information out as quickly as possible. But again, the thing that is important is we're making sure that, again, due process is preserved for the officers, due process is preserved for members of the public. And again, you know, you've seen around the country some places where there have been public records requests for like all video, not necessarily from a specific incident, and just that takes time to produce and it's expensive.
Now, community activists involved in the body camera debate basically want all of those details spelled out in writing about who can view the video and when. And that was why the judge sent all parties back to the drawing board. So here's what attorney Juan Chavez, who represents the Mental Health Alliance, told Kyla Boshi last week.
We have heard from DOJ what they are considering good metrics and policies for a body-worn camera policy. But again, if it's not in the agreement, who's to say it's enforceable? Who's to say that they're actually going to hold up their end of the bargain?
It seems as simple as put it in writing so we can guarantee this will happen in the end.
Precisely, yeah.
And that's the hope moving forward?
That is.
So again, the question remains, we ask this every time, when, given all of this, could we actually see body cameras on Portland police officers? Well, the city was scheduled to vote on it in early December, early next month. But now that federal judge has told everyone to go back to the drawing board, it's the last time I'll say drawing board, by the way, that will likely be pushed back. That December deadline will likely be pushed back. We'll, of course, keep you updated on any developments. Still ahead, meantime, here on The Story, we have a look at the Oregon National Guard's latest mission, helping resettle refugees from Afghanistan.
It's that kind of humanitarian part of it that is really fulfilling for us because we're getting to see kind of the happy ending.
We'll take you inside a massive refugee camp in the Midwest where the Oregon National Guard is stationed right now, when The Story continues. Welcome back. Keep sending in those questions and those comments to thestory@kgw.com or use the hashtag #TheStoryKGW on Twitter. Now, it's been a little over a week since kids became eligible for the Pfizer COVID vaccine, so we just kind of wanted to know how that's been going, because obviously getting a shot is not exactly a kid's favorite activity. Then again, we've seen a lot of adults throwing fits about getting the shot this year, too. That being said, it looks like so far parents are pretty eager to get their kids in for the vaccine. Oregon, we found out, has vaccinated more than 33,000 kids already. And in Washington, we should note the state's updates are a little behind, but they vaccinated more than 16,000 kids as of last Wednesday. So that number is likely much higher now that we're past the weekend. We'll keep you posted. It hasn't been easy to get vaccine appointments. They're filling up quickly at pharmacies and doctors' offices, but there have been a lot of clinics around town. Case in point, Portland Public Schools today held a clinic at Scott Elementary School in Northeast Portland. It was meant for kids at the school, but they didn't have to make an appointment. Their parents could just bring them in. 8 PPS schools are holding vaccine clinics right now as part of a pilot program, and there will be a few more before Thanksgiving. We should note these are all happening at Title I schools, which means the kids who go there are mostly from historically underserved communities, and they have higher barriers to getting the vaccine. But right now, Portland Public Schools is not requiring that kids get vaccinated, and it doesn't look like they'll do so for a while at this point. They had been, you might remember, discussing it for several weeks, and the school board was pretty split. Some board members definitely wanted a vaccine mandate. Some were on the fence about it because of issues like access to the vaccine. Some students, meanwhile, felt pretty strongly that they wanted a mandate, and about 200 kids at Grant High School walked out to show just how much they wanted it. The school board is discussing it again at tomorrow's school board meeting. But this is what happened last time when the board brought up this issue a few weeks ago.
You're cowards! You are cowards! I will not sit down. I won't comply. You guys are cowards!
Remember that? The school board, Portland Public School Board, had to shut down their meetings, at least in person, or I should note they had to shut down that meeting altogether when the anti-vaccine protesters did that, basically, and refused to put on masks. Now, PPS says staff will recommend that the board delay a vaccine mandate for students for at least 6 months and to implement a non-medical exemption process similar to exemptions for other vaccines. Now, the Oregon Health Authority says that the supply of kids' vaccines will be limited for these first few weeks, but they're expecting to catch up pretty soon. And they say there is, quote, significantly more vaccine supply now than there was at the beginning of the vaccine rollout last December. So if you haven't had any luck getting a vaccine appointment for your kid, or you haven't been able to make it to a clinic, basically, they say keep trying. This should get better soon. And by the way, we have a list at kgw.com of all the places you can go to find an appointment. All right, let's switch gears here and briefly go back to last summer. I'm sure you all remember the images coming out of Afghanistan this past summer, I should say. This is after the U.S. Withdrew its troops and thousands upon thousands of people tried to leave the country. Now, a lot of them did get evacuated. They were brought to the U.S., and about 250 Oregon National Guard soldiers are now stationed at a military base, not here, but in the Midwest, helping resettle Afghan refugees. Pat Doris has a look at that effort.
Just south of Indianapolis, Camp Atterbury stands as a modern military base that can hold as many as 10,000 soldiers. Instead, it now holds 5,000 refugees from Afghanistan, nearly half of them under the age of 18.
We have a lot of soldiers that do foot patrol, and they are definitely immersed with the Afghan population, especially the children. They're very fascinated with everything that we're doing.
That's Alex Isselstrom, a Bend police officer in civilian life. Now at the camp, he's the commander of the 1186th Military Police Company, operating in a place famous for its corn.
Seriously, there's a lot of corn here. It's wild.
His team protects the perimeter of the base, manning guard posts and making sure no one unauthorized gets in and no contraband is smuggled in either. So far, so good.
We really have not. It's been slow. We really are the law enforcement here on post, and we're grateful that things have been quiet, to be honest.
The camp is one of 8 in the U.S. that started taking in refugees after the president ordered massive airlifts in August. Most are men and women who worked for the U.S. during the long war in Afghanistan, along with their families. One of the camp leaders said many dreamed of a bright future in Afghanistan.
And then suddenly that ended, and they were displaced rapidly and violently from that dream. So there is a lot mentally and emotionally and spiritually that they're working through and will have to continue to work through. And they arrived here, and now they're doing some soul searching, dealing with that pain, dealing with that trauma, but also looking forward to try to figure out now what's my new dream.
Some still worry about attacks on family members back home, so the military limits those who can be seen on camera. 5,000 is a lot of people and a lot of needs. Some of them are overseen by Kara Lurwick and her Oregon National Guard soldiers.
It's that kind of humanitarian part of it that is really fulfilling for us, because we're getting to see kind of the happy ending.
The refugees are housed in blocks of rooms. Lieutenant Lurwick and her soldiers with the 224 Engineering Company fill a role called a mayoral cell. They deal with the refugees daily and help them get whatever they need, from clothing to food to fixing something inside their rooms. Lurwick said conversations have led to some funny moments.
I guess they had a class about road laws and driving laws and licensing and all that. And, talking about our different perspectives on it of, they're like, oh, you have a speed limit everywhere. And it's like, yes, we do.
She said it's rewarding to be helping on this historic mission.
It does feel good. Even, on our longer days, just going out there and seeing the people receive winter coats, or the kids playing soccer, or, having the guests, tell us that they appreciate what we're doing out here. And they often do. I get a lot of people just messaging me.
Camp leaders say it could take as long as a year to place everyone in a new home. The Oregon soldiers will be there to help out until early next fall. Pat Doris, KGW News.
Welcome back on this Monday. As we say, your feedback seriously does drive this show. We want to hear what you think is important for us to cover, so keep sending those thoughts to the story at kgw.com. Why not? We got this email from Karen, right? She wrote in. She said, there's a lot of talk about climate change. Okay, it's here. Now let's focus on what steps we all need to take to start turning it around. I think a lot of people are thinking the same thing. Karen, we really appreciate it. Well, kind of right on time, Oregon Congressman Earl Blumenauer just released some plans for battling climate change and trying to prevent natural disasters. Keely Chalmers breaks those plans down.
This summer, we certainly felt the effects here in the Pacific Northwest of our changing climate. Record and deadly heat, mega fires that ravaged our landscape and choked the West with smoke, and severe storms. Events that will only get more intense as our climate warms.
This decade is going to determine whether or not life is going to be recognizable for our children and grandchildren.
Congressman Earl Blumenauer says there's no time to wait. Just back from the UN Climate Change Conference, he outlined his plans to strengthen federal response to climate disasters like fires and heat waves.
FEMA is not authorized to deal with extreme heat. This is an area where we need to adjust what we do and how we go about it.
It's all in his new report called From Ruin to Resilience, Protecting Communities and Preventing Disasters, which also breaks down what the federal government is doing wrong.
We still allow people to build in the flame zone between the urban areas and out in the woods.
Blumenauer says to protect people, we need to first keep them out of risky areas.
I mean, right now, one branch of the federal government is moving to get people located out of floodplains because they suffer repeated flood loss, FEMA. And there's another agency, the HUD, which is because this land is inexpensive.
The report analyzes the impacts of various climate disasters around the country and examines the federal government's failure to properly prepare and respond.
The people who pay the price tend to be those who can least afford it. They're in vulnerable communities, low income, people of color, historically have been shortchanged.
Blumenauer says it's time the federal government spend money on programs to protect people, not just to respond to disasters. In the coming weeks, he'll begin introducing legislation to support the goals of his agenda.
And even the path that we're on now is not going to be enough to forestall really horrific impacts. So we need to redouble the efforts. We need to make sure that everybody is a part of it.
Keely Chalmers, KGW News.
Let us know what you think of that. Send those questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. Find us on social media. We're going to finish the show right after this. Thank you so much for joining us. While you're here, pick up your phone, follow us on Twitter at @TheStoryKGW, or again, email thestory@kgw.com. It's the last time I'm going to say that tonight, I promise. With that, it is the end of our show. So let's bring in Ashley Korslund for the news at 6:30. Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Maggie. We are checking out the coast to see all the winds out there, which got to 70 miles per hour in some spots.
Wow.
The news at 6:30 starts now.
This is KGW News at 6:30.
It has been a rain and wind-filled start to the week. Strong gusts blew in today, both at the coast and here in the valley. They were short-lived, but